Are your past lives shaping who you are? Karma, rebirth, and your Buddhist perspective. As we journey through life, there inevitably comes a moment when we pause, reflect, and examine the path we've traveled. With every passing year, the choices we've made, the roads we've taken, and the consequences of our decisions become more apparent. Some of those choices fill us with pride, others with regret, but have you ever wondered, what if you could reshape your future, regardless of your past? What if you could find a way to transform those past choices into a source of wisdom and strength for the years to come? This video offers more than just a philosophical exploration of ancient teachings. It is a gateway to life-changing wisdom that can dramatically shift the way you approach life, especially as you enter the later years. The teachings of the Buddha, filled with profound insights into the nature of existence, offer us not only solace, but also the tools to change the course of our future. These teachings are timeless, and they provide a roadmap for living a life of greater peace, understanding, and purpose. As we age, many of us begin to search for deeper meaning. We may find ourselves reflecting on the decisions we've made, the relationships we've nurtured, and the regrets we've held on to. But the teachings of the Buddha show us that our past is not a sentence. It is simply a series of actions that have led us to this moment. And the good news, we always have the power to create a new future. This video dives into 3 powerful Buddhist concepts: karma, rebirth, and the interconnectedness of all things that can help guide us through life's complexities. The idea of karma may seem like a distant, abstract force to many, but at its core, it is a simple law of cause and effect, deeply rooted in the intentions behind our actions. Rebirth, too, offers profound insights that challenge our conventional understanding of life and death. And when you begin to see the interconnectedness of all beings, you start to understand how deeply our choices impact not just ourselves, but the world around us. The Buddha's teachings tell us that the key to shaping a peaceful, fulfilling future lies not in the past, but in the present moment, your present actions, your present intentions. The past may have shaped us, but it does not define us. The journey we take from here is determined by the choices we make in every moment, every thought, every word. This video isn't just a lecture, it's an invitation to embark on a transformative journey. So stick with us until the very end, because the wisdom you will encounter here has the potential to change your life in ways you may not have imagined. The Buddha's teachings offer more than answers. They offer the path to a brighter, more compassionate future. Are you ready to begin the journey of transformation? Let's explore the timeless wisdom that can guide you towards a life of peace, understanding, and deep inner fulfillment. Chapter 1: Karma, Understanding the Law of Cause and Effect. Karma is a term many are familiar with, but few truly understand its depth. Often misunderstood in the West, karma is seen as a system of cosmic punishment or reward. We hear phrases like, "that's your karma," or "he must have bad karma," implying that life's events are just results of a higher cosmic judgment, an arbitrary system of good and bad luck. But this interpretation strays far from the true essence of karma in Buddhist thought. At its core, karma is the natural law of cause and effect. Every action, every word, every thought that we express sends out ripples into the world around us. This is not about divine retribution. Rather, it's about the simple and inevitable reality that our actions have consequences. The Buddha compared karma to a seed. What we plant, we will harvest in time. If we plant a seed of kindness, it will grow into a tree of goodwill. If we plant a seed of anger, it will sprout into bitterness and resentment. The quality of the seed lies in the intention behind it. This is where the heart of karma is rooted. One of the most essential aspects of karma in Buddhism is the concept of cetana, or intention. It is the driving force behind our actions. The Buddha made it clear that it's not simply the action itself that creates karma, but the intention behind it. Consider two people who both donate money to a homeless person. On the surface, the act is the same. They both give to help someone in need. However, the intention behind each act could not be more different. One person is motivated by genuine compassion, a heartfelt desire to ease the suffering of another without expecting anything in return. The other person gives with the intention of gaining praise, seeking recognition, or fulfilling a sense of duty. The outcome of these two acts is vastly different despite the identical action. The first person generates positive karma, rooted in love and compassion, while the second creates karma tied to ego, seeking approval and attachment to external validation. This distinction is crucial because it helps us understand that karma is not some arbitrary system of fate. It's not about good or bad luck, it's about the deeper qualities of our intentions. Our circumstances, our current reality, are the result not just of past actions, but of the mental and emotional seeds we have planted. And the most empowering part of this understanding, we are not prisoners of our past karma. At any moment we can change our intentions, change the seeds we plant, and change the course of our lives. Karma is not set in stone. It is an ongoing process, continuously being created in every moment. If we're mindful of our actions and intentions, we can begin to heal old karmic imprints and create new, positive ones. It's like a person who has spent years living in anger and frustration. The pain of past experiences can build up and create patterns of negativity, but through awareness and mindful action, this can be transformed. Every decision, even the smallest ones, has the potential to shift the balance of our karma. A simple act of kindness, a smile to a stranger, a kind word to a colleague, creates new karma. The more we act with positive intentions, the more we begin to shape our world into one that is peaceful, fulfilling, and connected. Take, for example, the story of a person who has always struggled with impatience. They often find themselves frustrated in situations where things don't go their way. Perhaps they're stuck in traffic or waiting in a long line at the store. These small moments of frustration seem insignificant, but over time they create a pattern of reactive behavior. However, if this person becomes aware of their impatience and chooses to act differently, even in these small moments, they can start to change their karmic path. Instead of reacting with irritation, they can take a deep breath and choose patience. This small, conscious shift in intention will begin to create a new karmic imprint, one rooted in calm and acceptance. Over time, this simple practice can have profound effects on their life, improving relationships, reducing stress, and fostering inner peace. Karma teaches us that we are not victims of fate, but active participants in the shaping of our own lives. The Buddha's teachings are not meant to make us feel powerless, but to empower us to take control of our actions, thoughts, and intentions. Through awareness, mindfulness, and compassion, we can transform our karma, free ourselves from negative patterns, and begin a new journey, one that is more aligned with our deepest values and desires. The beauty of karma lies in its simplicity. It's not about complex rituals or mystical forces. It's about being present in each moment, being aware of our intentions, and making conscious choices that reflect the person we want to become. Just as a gardener tends to their garden, planting seeds of kindness, patience, and love, we too have the power to cultivate a life of peace and wisdom, one action at a time. So the next time you find yourself in a difficult situation, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what is the intention behind my thoughts, my words, my actions? What seed am I planting right now? By becoming aware of the power of your intention, you open the door to creating a life that reflects your highest values and deepest aspirations. In the end, karma is a reflection of who we are, the sum of our intentions and the actions that arise from them. It is not a fixed destiny, but a living, breathing process that we shape with every step we take. Understanding this law empowers us to transform not only our own lives, but also the world around us, creating a ripple effect of kindness, love, and wisdom for all. Chapter 2: Samskaras, the imprints of our past actions. In the fabric of our lives, the actions we take, the thoughts we entertain, and the emotions we experience are not isolated moments. They are imprints, samskaras, that carve paths in our consciousness. In Buddhist psychology, samskaras refer to the mental and emotional impressions left by our past experiences. These imprints, much like the grooves left by a flowing river, shape how we respond to the world around us. Over time, they create patterns, automatic reactions that influence everything from how we handle stress to how we perceive our relationships and even how we view ourselves. Consider for a moment how we might respond to everyday stress. For example, imagine a stressful situation. Maybe you're stuck in traffic, late for an important meeting. If over the years you've conditioned yourself to react to stress with irritation or frustration, that emotional response becomes a reflex. It's almost as if your mind has been trained to automatically react in a particular way. That's a samskara in action. Each time you feel frustration bubbling up, you are tapping into a well-worn pattern, a mental imprint left behind by past experiences. In Buddhism, the key to understanding and transforming these samskaras lies in awareness and mindfulness. Mindfulness, the practice of being fully present and observant without judgment, is the essential tool for unraveling the patterns we've unconsciously created. The Buddha taught that to free ourselves from suffering, we must first become aware of the mental habits and emotional patterns that bind us. By recognizing these ingrained responses, we begin to see how they influence our present moment and, ultimately, our future. Let's look at a story that illustrates how samskaras shape our reactions. There was a monk who had spent many years meditating in a remote forest. One day, a group of villagers came to visit. The monk, known for his serene composure, greeted them warmly. But one villager, seeing how calm the monk was, decided to test him. The villager threw a stone toward the monk, hitting him in the shoulder. The monk didn't flinch, didn't shout, or even look in the direction of the stone. He simply smiled and asked, "Why are you angry?" The villager, now embarrassed, explained that he had thrown the stone to see if he could provoke a reaction. The monk gently replied, "You see, I have learned to transform my responses. The stone that hit me was not the cause of my reaction, but my past reactions to things like this, the imprints I have cultivated over time. My response is simply the natural unfolding of my practice." This monk had learned to transform his samskaras, those ingrained emotional responses to the world. His practice of mindfulness allowed him to dissolve the habitual pattern of reacting with anger or frustration. In turn, his emotional response was replaced with peace, a peace that came not from avoiding difficult situations, but from mastering his internal reactions. This story serves as a profound reminder that we are not prisoners of our past. While our samskaras influence how we respond to the world, we have the power to shift them. If we've spent years harboring resentment, fear, or anger, we are not doomed to remain stuck in those patterns. By practicing mindfulness and cultivating awareness, we can begin to transform those imprints into something more positive and nurturing. As we age, our samskaras become more entrenched in our consciousness. Over time, we accumulate layers of emotional responses, and these layers shape how we engage with life. Perhaps we've spent decades carrying a sense of resentment toward a loved one or holding onto a fear of rejection. These mental habits don't define us, but they do shape our reality. Buddhism encourages us to examine these imprints with compassion and without judgment, so we can begin the process of healing. Mindfulness is not about denying our feelings or pretending that we don't have emotional reactions to life. Instead, it's about creating the space to observe those reactions, to witness them without being swept away by them. It's the ability to sit with our anger or frustration without acting on it impulsively. Over time, this practice allows us to replace these habitual responses with more compassionate and wise reactions. One of the most powerful aspects of mindfulness is that it helps us uncover the roots of our samskaras. Maybe our frustration with traffic comes from a childhood experience of feeling out of control or helpless. Perhaps the resentment we carry in our relationships stems from unresolved conflicts in the past. When we start to look deeper, we begin to see that our present reactions are often echoes of old wounds. For example, think about how you respond when someone criticizes you. Do you get defensive, immediately wanting to argue? Do you feel a rush of shame, wanting to retreat and hide? These reactions are likely tied to past experiences, imprints from earlier moments in life that have shaped how we view ourselves and the world. But through mindfulness, we can pause before reacting and ask ourselves, is this response truly mine, or is it a pattern I've been carrying for years? By questioning our automatic reactions, we give ourselves the chance to respond differently. Perhaps instead of defending ourselves, we take a moment to listen deeply and reflect. Maybe instead of retreating into shame, we recognize the opportunity for growth. Each time we make a conscious choice to respond with awareness, we weaken the power of the old samskaras, replacing them with new, more beneficial patterns. In Buddhism, the transformation of samskaras is not an overnight process. It requires patience, practice, and compassion. Just as a river carves its way through rock, our habitual patterns take time to shift. But every moment of mindfulness brings us closer to the freedom of releasing old imprints and replacing them with ones that serve our highest good. Consider the power of simple practices, like taking a deep breath when we feel anger rising or pausing before we speak in a heated conversation. These small acts of mindfulness, though they may seem insignificant in the moment, gradually replace negative samskaras with positive ones. Over time, we begin to see that we are not bound by our past reactions, but are free to create a new way of engaging with life, one that is calm, compassionate, and rooted in wisdom. In the end, transforming our samskaras is about reclaiming our power. It is a practice of self-awareness, of taking responsibility for our inner world, and choosing in each moment to cultivate responses that are rooted in love, patience, and understanding. This process does not erase the challenges we face, but it does give us the strength to meet them with a clearer mind and a kinder heart. It is through this mindful transformation that we begin to break free from the cycles of suffering and move toward a life of peace, freedom, and deep fulfillment. Chapter 3: Rebirth and the Cycle of Life. The idea of rebirth is often one of the most difficult concepts in Buddhism to grasp, particularly for those raised in traditions where the soul is seen as eternal and unchanging. In Western religious thought, the belief in an immortal soul that lives on after death is fundamental. However, the Buddha's teachings on rebirth challenge this perception in profound ways. In Buddhism, there is no permanent, unchanging self. The Buddha taught that what we perceive as I or me is not a singular, fixed identity, but a dynamic aggregation of 5 elements known as the 5 khandhas or aggregates. These include form, our physical body, feeling our sensations, perception, how we interpret sensory information, mental formations, our thoughts, intentions, and emotions, and consciousness, our awareness. These 5 khandhas are not static. They are continuously changing and interdependent, constantly arising and passing away. The Buddha's radical teaching was that the self, the I we cling to, is not a fixed entity. Instead, it's a flow, a combination of impermanent factors that are always in flux. This impermanence is what leads to the idea of rebirth. Rebirth, in the Buddhist sense, is not the continuation of a permanent, unchanging soul. Rather, it's the continuation of the stream of consciousness, shaped by the karmic forces and mental imprints or samskaras we accumulate over lifetimes. When we die, the components that make up our sense of self, our body, thoughts, feelings, and consciousness, dissolve. However, the karmic tendencies, the habitual patterns and mental imprints we've formed during our lives, continue to flow forward, influencing the conditions of our future lives. Rebirth, in this context, is not about an individual soul traveling through lifetimes, but rather the flow of karma and samskaras being carried into new forms and experiences. This concept can be illustrated with a simple example. Let's say a person in this lifetime has a deep affinity for music, an almost innate talent for playing the piano, for example. In Buddhist thought, this talent is not carried forward because of some eternal soul that remembers its past life. Instead, it's the karmic tendencies and mental imprints, that accumulated understanding, the habits, the love of music, that persist and manifest in future lives. Perhaps in their next life, they will be born into a family where music plays a central role, or they might naturally gravitate toward the study of an instrument. Their karmic imprints, the mental habits and tendencies they've cultivated over time, continue to shape the future, even after the body and individual self have passed. This understanding of rebirth provides us with a profound opportunity for growth and transformation. It allows us to see that our current life is not simply a random series of events, but the culmination of our past actions, thoughts, and decisions. It also empowers us with the realization that we are not chained to the past. While our previous actions shape our current experiences, we can shape our future by acting with intention, kindness, and wisdom in the present moment. For instance, consider the story of a person who has struggled with anger throughout their life. They've found themselves reacting to situations with frustration, bitterness, or impatience, often without even realizing it. But as they grow older and begin to study the teachings of Buddhism, they learn to recognize these habits, these samskaras, and choose a different way of responding. Instead of reacting impulsively, they begin to pause, take a breath, and respond with understanding and compassion. Over time, this practice begins to change their habitual reactions. Instead of feeling angry when cut off in traffic, they feel a moment of compassion for the other driver. When faced with a disagreement with a loved one, instead of raising their voice, they choose to listen with an open heart. By making these small shifts in their daily life, they begin to cultivate a new karmic flow, one that leads to greater peace, joy, and fulfillment. This is the essence of Buddhist teachings on rebirth. While we are the sum of our past actions, we are not slaves to them. By acting with awareness and intention, we shape the conditions of our future lives. Rebirth is not a fate we are stuck in, but a cycle that we can influence through our actions. We are the architects of our future, and by cultivating wholesome intentions, we can steer the course of our lives toward liberation and peace. In Buddhism, the teachings on rebirth also emphasize the interdependence of all things. Our actions don't exist in isolation. The karma we create, the mental imprints we form, not only affect our future lives but also impact others. Each act of kindness, each choice made with wisdom, reverberates beyond our individual selves. In the same way, negative actions, driven by greed, hatred, or delusion, have consequences that extend beyond us. This interconnectedness is the very foundation of the Buddhist view of the world. We are not isolated beings, but part of a vast web of existence, and our actions have far-reaching effects on the world around us. Consider the story of the Buddha's previous life as a monkey king, known in the Jataka tales. In one life, the future Buddha was born as the leader of a monkey troop. One day, a human king sought to destroy the monkey troop to claim the mangoes from the trees they inhabited. In an act of selflessness, the monkey king used his own body to form a bridge across a river so his troop could escape. His sacrifice not only saved the lives of the monkeys, but it also planted the seeds of compassion and wisdom in his future lives, eventually leading him to Buddhahood. This story reminds us that no action is insignificant. Even seemingly small acts of kindness, self-sacrifice, or compassion can have profound effects, shaping not only our present moment, but also our future and the lives of others. Rebirth, then, is not simply a concept for understanding life after death. It is a call to action in the present. It teaches us that every moment is an opportunity to plant the seeds for a better future, not just for ourselves, but for others as well. Our actions today, guided by intention, compassion, and wisdom, will influence not only our future lives, but the world we leave behind. This is the liberating truth at the heart of Buddhist teachings on rebirth. While we are shaped by our past, we are never bound to it. Every moment is a new opportunity to act with awareness, to create positive karma, and to shape a future that is filled with peace, joy, and fulfillment. The cycle of life, death, and rebirth is not a prison, it is the natural flow of existence. And through mindful action, we can break free from suffering, create new patterns of wisdom, and ultimately reach the state of liberation known as nirvana. Chapter 4: Ignorance and the Cycle of Suffering. At the heart of Buddhist philosophy lies a profound and often uncomfortable truth. The root cause of our suffering is ignorance. But this ignorance, avidya in Sanskrit, is not merely a lack of knowledge, it is a deep misunderstanding of the very nature of existence. It is the inability to perceive the world as it truly is, in all its impermanence and interconnection. This ignorance is the lens through which we see the world, and it clouds our perception, leading us to cling to things that are fleeting, to search for permanence where there is none. Our attachment to this illusion of permanence creates the foundation for all of our suffering. We cling to the idea of a permanent self, a solid identity that we believe defines us. We think of ourselves as separate from the world around us, as isolated individuals with distinct boundaries. But the Buddha's teachings reveal that this self we so desperately hold on to is, in fact, an illusion. The I we imagine is nothing more than a collection of ever-changing physical and mental elements, our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts, our perceptions, all of which are impermanent and interdependent. This misunderstanding, the belief in a permanent, unchanging self, fuels our desires. When we perceive ourselves as separate, we crave the things that will make us feel complete, secure, and permanent. We chase after possessions, relationships, achievements, and experiences, thinking that they will give us lasting satisfaction. But as we know all too well, nothing outside of us can ever provide lasting happiness. Everything is temporary. Our bodies age, relationships change, possessions wear out, and experiences fade. When we cling to these things, we only set ourselves up for disappointment, frustration, and ultimately suffering. The cycle of suffering in Buddhism, known as samsara, is driven by this attachment to impermanence. Our ignorance leads us to grasp at things that are not only beyond our control, but also inherently transient. This grasping creates a ripple effect that perpetuates the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. With each life, we continue to cling to the same illusions, creating new desires and attachments, which in turn create new suffering. We repeat this cycle over and over, endlessly chasing after that which is not real, never realizing that peace and freedom lie in letting go. Consider a person who spends their life accumulating wealth, thinking that money will provide them with security and happiness. They work tirelessly, pushing aside relationships, health, and even personal well-being, convinced that the more they acquire, the more fulfilled they will be. but eventually they realize that wealth does not bring the peace they seek. As they grow older, they may feel anxious about losing it or about not having enough. This fear of loss, this attachment, creates suffering, and when death approaches, they face the harsh reality that all of their wealth, all of their attachments cannot go with them. This is the suffering of attachment, of clinging to the illusion of permanence in a world that is, by its very nature, transient. But this suffering does not have to be our fate. The Buddha offers us a path out of this cycle, a path of wisdom and awakening. The key to breaking free from the cycle of suffering is the development of wisdom, or panna. Wisdom is not simply intellectual knowledge, it is an experiential understanding of the true nature of reality. It is the deep insight into the impermanence of all things and the interconnectedness of all life. When we begin to see the world as it truly is, when we understand that everything is in constant flux, we start to let go of our attachment to permanence. We begin to accept the flow of life with grace and equanimity, knowing that nothing is fixed or permanent. This process of awakening requires mindfulness, the practice of being fully present and aware in each moment. Mindfulness allows us to observe our thoughts, feelings, and reactions without judgment. It helps us recognize the moments when we are clinging to things that are not real, when we are attaching ourselves to fleeting experiences and emotions. Through mindfulness, we can begin to dissolve these attachments, allowing us to experience life as it truly is, constantly changing, interconnected, and beautiful in its impermanence. Meditation is another essential tool in this process. Through meditation, we can cultivate the mental clarity needed to understand the nature of our attachments and the impermanence of all things. Meditation helps us develop a deeper sense of self-awareness, allowing us to observe our thoughts and emotions from a place of detachment without becoming overwhelmed by them. With regular practice, we learn to step back from our habitual reactions and see them as they are, temporary, fleeting, and ultimately not a part of our true nature. As we become more mindful and attuned to the impermanence of life, we start to let go of the attachments that cause us suffering. This is the path to liberation, the realization that we are not defined by our possessions, our identities, or our experiences. We are not separate from the world, but an integral part of the ever-changing flow of life. There is a beautiful story in the Buddhist tradition that illustrates the transformative power of mindfulness and wisdom. It's the story of the Buddha's encounter with a woman named Kisagatami, who had recently lost her child. Grief-stricken, Kisagatami went to the Buddha and asked him to bring her child back to life. The Buddha, with deep compassion, told her to find a mustard seed from a family who had never experienced death. Kisagatami went from house to house, only to find that every family had experienced the loss of someone dear. Eventually, Kisagatami returned to the Buddha, her heart heavy with the realization that death is a universal experience and that nothing in life is permanent. In that moment, she found peace, not through the resurrection of her child, but through the understanding of the impermanence of life and the interconnectedness of all beings. This story is a powerful reminder that our suffering is often rooted in the denial of life's impermanence. When we cling to people, places, or things as though they are permanent, we set ourselves up for pain. But when we embrace the truth of impermanence, we can begin to live with greater peace, free from the fear of loss. We learn to love and appreciate the present moment, knowing that it is all we truly have. In Buddhism, we are taught that the cycle of suffering can only be broken through the cultivation of wisdom, mindfulness, and compassion. By developing a clear understanding of the impermanent and interconnected nature of all things, we can begin to loosen our attachments and live with greater equanimity. As we release our attachment to the illusion of a permanent self, we find freedom. We see that the world is not something to control, but something to experience with gratitude and acceptance. In the end, the cycle of suffering is not a curse, but an opportunity, a challenge to awaken to the truth of our existence and to live in harmony with the flow of life. Through mindfulness, meditation, and the cultivation of wisdom, we can transcend ignorance and step onto the path of liberation, where suffering no longer holds us captive and where peace and joy are found in the present moment. Chapter 5: Living with Karma and Rebirth, a Path to Liberation. The teachings of karma and rebirth offer us a profound way of understanding how to live our lives more intentionally and mindfully. These concepts are not meant to invoke fear or anxiety, as some may initially believe, but to show us how we are deeply connected to the world and to each other. Understanding the law of cause and effect, the simple reality that every action we take, every word we speak, and every thought we hold has consequences, empowers us to shape a better future. And this future, while influenced by our past actions, is not fixed or predetermined. Each moment offers us the opportunity to plant new seeds of compassion, wisdom, and kindness, which will bear fruit in the times ahead. As we age, it becomes increasingly important to reflect on the choices we've made, not just to look back with regret, but to understand how those decisions have shaped our lives. Yet at the same time, we must remember that the future is not some distant, unchangeable destiny. It's something we can influence, starting right now. By acting with greater mindfulness, by choosing kindness and wisdom over impatience or anger, we have the power to change the trajectory of our lives. Through these daily choices, we slowly transform our karma and build the foundation for a future that is more peaceful, joyful, and fulfilling. Living with karma and rebirth means understanding that every small choice we make matters. We are constantly planting seeds, whether through our actions or our thoughts, and those seeds, whether planted consciously or unconsciously, grow into the conditions of our future lives. If we live with awareness, if we choose to act with good intentions, those seeds will grow into a future filled with peace, harmony, and understanding. If, on the other hand, we continue to act out of greed, anger, or fear, we continue to build negative karmic patterns that will inevitably lead to more suffering. Through mindfulness and meditation, we cultivate the awareness that allows us to recognize the patterns in our lives, the habits, the repeated reactions, the unhelpful thought patterns. These are our samskaras, the imprints of past actions, thoughts, and experiences. When we meditate, we are able to see clearly how these samskaras influence our reactions to the world around us. Meditation allows us to step back from our habitual responses and choose a different path, one that is grounded in compassion and wisdom rather than fear or resentment. Take, for example, someone who has spent much of their life harboring anger toward others, perhaps because of past injustices or personal failures. Over time, this anger has become deeply ingrained in their consciousness. It shapes how they react to almost everything, from small inconveniences to larger setbacks. But through the practice of mindfulness, they begin to see this anger clearly. They begin to understand that the anger is not their true nature, but a result of their past actions and reactions, fueled by attachment and ignorance. With this realization, they begin to choose differently. Instead of responding with anger, they pause and choose a response rooted in compassion and understanding. This shift is not easy and takes time, but it is through consistent practice that we begin to weaken the hold of old samskaras and cultivate new ones. Each act of kindness, each moment of patience, each breath of awareness strengthens a new pattern, one that leads to greater peace and freedom. Over time, these positive samskaras replace the old ones, and we begin to see that we are not defined by our past reactions, but by the choices we make today. The Buddha's teachings on karma and rebirth ultimately point to a path of liberation, not just for ourselves, but for all beings. The ultimate goal of Buddhism is not merely to improve our future lives, but to attain liberation from the cycle of birth, death and rebirth altogether. This liberation is known as nirvana, and it is the cessation of all suffering. In nirvana, the cycle of karmic imprints and rebirth no longer binds us. We transcend the dualities of pleasure and pain, birth and death, and experience a deep peace that is unshaken by the conditions of the world. This path to liberation is not a distant ideal, but a reality that can be attained in this lifetime through the consistent cultivation of mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom. The Buddha's teachings are clear and direct. Cease to do evil, cultivate good, purify the mind. This simple yet profound teaching encapsulates the entire path to transformation. By ceasing harmful actions, cultivating wholesome deeds, and purifying our minds, we begin to transform our karma and change the course of our lives. In the end, the journey of karma and rebirth is a reminder that we are not victims of fate. We are active participants in the shaping of our own futures. We have the power to change, to create new karmic patterns, and to live more peacefully and compassionately. Every moment is an opportunity to act with intention, to plant the seeds that will bear fruit in the future. And as we live with greater awareness, we begin to break free from the cycle of suffering, moving closer to the ultimate goal of liberation, where the cycle of rebirth and the burden of suffering no longer define us. Through the cultivation of wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, we can live a life that is truly free. Chapter 6: The Continuity of Karma and the Influence of Past Actions. Karma is not a distant, abstract concept. It's an ever-present force, playing out in the small, seemingly insignificant moments of our daily lives. Every action we take, every thought we think, every word we speak carries a consequence. It creates ripples that extend beyond ourselves, shaping the world around us. These ripples, however small, continue to impact our lives and the lives of others long after the initial moment has passed. As we grow older, these karmic ripples become more pronounced. The choices we made in our youth, the relationships we built, the habits we formed, they all contribute to the present we experience today. Our actions, whether positive or negative, have long-lasting effects, and we begin to see the impact of those past choices in how we experience life now. But it is important to understand that karma doesn't operate in a fixed or linear way. The past may shape our current circumstances, but it does not control our future. Karma is constantly being created, moment by moment. With awareness and mindfulness, we have the power to change the karmic patterns we've cultivated, and in doing so, we can change our future. One of the most powerful aspects of the Buddha's teachings is the understanding that we are not defined by our past actions. While the consequences of our past decisions may shape us, we are not prisoners of them. The past is not a sentence. It is simply a reflection of our past choices, and in the present moment, we have the ability to choose again. This is the true freedom that karma offers us. The ability to break free from the patterns of the past and to create new, more positive habits. The key to changing our karma lies in our intention. Every action we take, no matter how small, begins with an intention. If our intention is driven by anger, greed, or fear, the resulting karma will reflect those negative emotions. However, if our intention is rooted in compassion, kindness, and wisdom, the resulting karma will bring us closer to peace and liberation. This is why mindfulness is so important. By becoming aware of our thoughts, feelings, and actions in each moment, we can begin to see the intentions behind them. When we act with awareness, we create space for new, more positive karmic patterns to form. For example, consider an elderly person who has spent much of their life holding on to resentment, unable to forgive others or themselves for past wrongs. Over the years, this resentment has grown into a heavy burden, impacting their health, their relationships, and their overall sense of well-being. But through mindfulness, this person begins to see how their past actions and thoughts have led them to this place of suffering. With this awareness, they realize that they have the power to choose differently. They can choose to forgive not just others but themselves, and in doing so, they begin to release the grip of the past. Slowly, they start to shift their focus from anger and bitterness to compassion and understanding, creating a new karmic path that leads to greater peace and joy. This is the power of mindfulness. It allows us to observe our habitual reactions without judgment, creating the space needed to change them. The more we practice mindfulness, the more we begin to see the patterns that have shaped our lives. We can begin to break free from the cycles of negativity and start to cultivate new, more positive patterns. It's through this practice that we can gradually transform our karma, freeing ourselves from the burdens of the past and creating a future that is filled with peace, love, and wisdom. The Buddha taught us that the ultimate goal of life is liberation from the cycle of suffering, samsara. This liberation, known as nirvana, is the cessation of all suffering and the end of the cycle of rebirth. It is the state of being fully awake, fully free from attachment, and fully at peace with the impermanence of life. But reaching nirvana is not about escaping from the world or retreating into isolation. It is about living fully in the world with compassion and awareness while not being attached to the fleeting nature of things. It is about understanding that everything is interconnected, that our actions have consequences, and that the key to liberation lies in how we respond to the world around us. The path to liberation is a journey of transformation, not just of our actions, but of our minds. By practicing mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom, we can transform the karma we've accumulated, breaking free from the cycle of suffering and rebirth. The Buddha's simple yet profound teaching, cease to do evil, cultivate good, purify the mind, is a roadmap for this transformation. When we stop creating harm, when we focus on cultivating goodness and purifying our hearts and minds, we begin to shift our karma in ways that lead to greater happiness, peace, and ultimately liberation. Every moment is an opportunity to plant a new seed. The past does not have to define us, and the future is not fixed. Through mindful actions, compassionate intentions, and the wisdom to understand the impermanent nature of life, we can shape a future that is free from suffering and full of peace. It's in this awareness, in the choice to act with kindness and wisdom, that we begin to transform our karma and ultimately find our way to liberation. Chapter 7: Rebirth and the Cycle of Samsara, How to Break Free. The cycle of samsara, or rebirth, is one of the most central and transformative teachings in Buddhism. It refers to the endless loop of birth, death, and rebirth that all beings undergo, driven by the forces of ignorance and attachment. While the cycle itself might seem daunting and inevitable, Buddhism offers a profound perspective on how we can break free from it. Unlike many Western philosophies or religions that suggest the persistence of an eternal soul that moves from one life to the next, Buddhism teaches the principle of anatta, the doctrine of no self. What we consider to be our permanent I or me is not a solid, unchanging entity. Rather, it is a constantly evolving aggregation of physical, emotional, and mental phenomena subject to change in every moment. At first, this realization may feel unsettling. We are accustomed to thinking of ourselves as fixed, permanent beings. We define ourselves by our roles, our experiences, our desires, and our attachments. The idea that this self is an illusion, that it is constantly changing, and that there is no permanent essence underlying our experiences can be a difficult pill to swallow. Yet this is precisely what the Buddha encouraged us to understand, that by letting go of the attachment to a fixed self, we begin to transcend the very cycle of samsara that traps us in endless suffering. Buddhism teaches that what is reborn is not an eternal soul or a permanent identity, but the continuation of karmic tendencies. Our actions, thoughts, and emotions leave imprints in our consciousness. these are the karmic seeds we plant. Over lifetimes, these tendencies shape our experiences, pushing us to act in certain ways. And because we are bound by ignorance, we often find ourselves repeating the same mistakes over and over again, from one life to the next. Our desires, attachments, and aversions keep us tethered to the cycle of rebirth, perpetuating suffering. One of the most profound realizations in Buddhism is that, although we may feel caught in the cycles of samsara, it is not inevitable that we remain trapped. We are not bound by some immutable fate. The teachings offer a way to transcend this cycle through wisdom, mindfulness, and ethical conduct. By breaking free from ignorance, seeing the world as it truly is, and letting go of our attachments, we can step off the wheel of samsara and move toward the ultimate goal of nirvana, the cessation of all suffering and the end of rebirth. Take a moment to reflect on the idea that our actions, no matter how small, ripple outward and affect not only our own lives but the lives of others. One powerful example comes from a story of a wise monk who, after years of meditation and mindful living, shared his insight with a layperson struggling with his attachment to wealth. This layperson clung so strongly to the belief that his happiness was tied to his material success, and as a result, he was constantly anxious, never feeling secure or at peace. The monk explained to him that attachment to things, whether wealth, status, or even relationships, was what kept him trapped in samsara. The monk spoke of impermanence, reminding the layperson that everything, even wealth, is subject to change. By embracing this truth and cultivating detachment, the layperson could find lasting peace. The lesson here is clear. Our attachment to the things of this world, our possessions, our sense of self, our ideas of how life should unfold, keeps us bound to the cycle of samsara. We suffer because we resist the reality of impermanence and the natural flow of life. We chase after things, believing they will make us happy, only to find that they fade away or slip through our fingers, leaving us grasping for more. The path to liberation begins with mindfulness, the ability to observe our thoughts and actions without judgment, to see clearly how our attachments and desires fuel the cycle of suffering. Mindfulness allows us to witness the habitual patterns that keep us trapped in samsara. It's a practice that teaches us to respond to life with awareness rather than reacting blindly from old, ingrained tendencies. Through this practice, we begin to understand that we are not our thoughts or our emotions. We are not our desires. We are simply the awareness observing them. And in that awareness, we find the freedom to let go of the patterns that bind us. A powerful example of how mindfulness can break the cycle of samsara is the story of a woman in her later years who had spent much of her life caught in the cycle of anger and resentment. For years, she harbored grudges from past hurts, real or perceived, and this anger poisoned her relationships and her own peace of mind. But as she entered her later years, she found herself reflecting deeply on the teachings of the Buddha. With the encouragement of a teacher, she began practicing mindfulness, observing her reactions and realizing that her anger was not who she truly was. It was simply a habitual response, an attachment to old hurts. Through mindfulness and compassion, she began to release that anger step by step. Her heart softened, and with it, the karmic patterns of anger and resentment were replaced by kindness, understanding, and love. She found peace not by denying the past, but by releasing its hold on her. This story illustrates that no matter how long we've been caught in the cycle of samsara, it is never too late to change. The path to liberation is always available, whether we are young or old, whether we've made mistakes in the past or lived a life of righteousness. The Buddha himself attained enlightenment later in life, proving that it is never too late to break free from the cycle of suffering. To break free from samsara, we must understand its root causes: ignorance, attachment, and craving. These three poisons bind us to the cycle of rebirth. We crave what we believe will bring us happiness, possessions, success, approval, while simultaneously clinging to the belief that we can control our environment and outcomes. Ignorance prevents us from seeing the true nature of reality, and attachment keeps us chained to the idea of a permanent, fixed self. By developing mindfulness, practicing ethical conduct, and cultivating wisdom, we begin to dissolve these poisons. Through mindfulness, we come to see the impermanence of all things. We recognize that nothing in life, whether good or bad, is permanent. With wisdom, we begin to understand that attachment to impermanent things only brings suffering. By acting with compassion, we begin to move away from self-centered desires and toward actions that benefit all beings. As we reach the later stages of life, it's natural to reflect on our past choices and what we've accomplished. And yet, the Buddha's teachings remind us that it is never too late to begin the path to liberation. Even in our later years, we have the ability to transform our karma, to purify our minds, and to break free from the cycle of samsara. Liberation is not a distant, abstract goal, but a path we walk every day with every action and every thought. As we move forward with mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, we gradually release the attachments and desires that bind us, and we find peace in the impermanence of life. Chapter 8: Living with Intention, the Power of Mindfulness. Mindfulness is the key to unlocking a life of peace, wisdom, and freedom. In Buddhism, it is not just a technique, it is the very heart of transforming our karma and our lives. Mindfulness allows us to observe our habitual patterns, thoughts, and emotions without judgment or attachment, and provides us the space to choose how we respond to each moment. For those of us who have reached the later stages of life, mindfulness becomes an especially powerful tool. Over the years, we accumulate experiences, some uplifting and others painful, and those experiences shape our worldview, often leading us to carry heavy emotional baggage. Mindfulness allows us to shed that weight, to live more fully in the present moment, and to step into the flow of life with greater ease and understanding. To truly practice mindfulness, we need to be fully present, not lost in the past or future, but engaged with the here and now. It's about paying attention to our thoughts, emotions, and actions without labeling them as good or bad. It's an awareness of the impermanence of all things and an acceptance of whatever arises. This awareness is deeply liberating. When we can recognize that everything, including our emotions, our thoughts, and our bodies, is in constant flux, we begin to let go of the need to control or resist life. Instead of reacting with anger or frustration, we develop a sense of spaciousness in our minds, allowing us to respond with clarity, compassion, and wisdom. Consider, for example, a person who has spent many years holding onto resentment towards a family member. The grudge, perhaps sparked by a misunderstanding or a past hurt, has shaped their emotional responses. Every time they encounter this family member, they feel anger and frustration rise within them. These emotions, formed from past experiences, have become habitual reactions. Yet, through the practice of mindfulness, this person begins to see these feelings for what they are: fleeting, impermanent, and tied to past events that no longer serve them. By being mindful, they begin to recognize the anger as it arises, and in that moment they have a choice. Rather than letting the anger dictate their behavior, they can pause and ask themselves, is this anger helping me? Is it serving my peace? In doing so, they recognize that the past no longer needs to define their present. They choose to let go of the resentment, replacing it with forgiveness, understanding, and compassion. This shift is not immediate, but through consistent mindfulness, the person gradually frees themselves from the weight of the past, creating new, positive karma that will shape their future relationships. This process of letting go is not about denying the reality of past wounds or pretending that they didn't happen. It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose how we respond to them. Through mindfulness, we no longer have to be controlled by our emotions or past experiences. Instead, we can respond with wisdom, acting with compassion toward ourselves and others. This change in perspective, although subtle at first, has profound effects on our emotional well-being and our relationships. Mindfulness also helps us to see the interconnectedness of all beings. We are not separate, isolated individuals. We are deeply interconnected with the people around us and the world at large. Our actions ripple outward, affecting not only ourselves but also those we encounter. The more we cultivate mindfulness, the more we begin to realize the impact of our words and actions on others. We start to see that every act of kindness, every gesture of understanding, contributes to the well-being of others and, ultimately, the world. This interconnectedness means that our karma is not something that only impacts us in isolation. When we act with compassion, we contribute to the greater good of all beings. Every time we choose love over fear, patience over anger, or generosity over greed, we plant seeds that create a more harmonious world. This is the transformative power of mindfulness. It shifts our focus from self-centered desires to the welfare of all beings. In the process, we not only create positive karma for ourselves, but also contribute to a collective, global shift toward kindness, compassion, and peace. There's a story from the Buddhist tradition about a teacher who, while walking with his student, observed a woman crying at the edge of a river. The teacher stopped and asked her why she was crying, and the woman explained that she had lost her child to the river's current. The teacher, with great compassion, simply said, "If you want to stop your suffering, you must stop holding on to the illusion of permanence. This world is in constant change, and to suffer is to cling to what is fleeting." The woman, though deeply grieving, was struck by his words. In the weeks that followed, she began to practice mindfulness, observing her grief, her attachment to her lost child, and how that attachment was causing her continued suffering. Slowly, she began to let go of her attachment, not in the sense of forgetting her child, but in accepting the impermanence of all things. In doing so, she found peace and a renewed sense of connection to the world around her. Her practice of mindfulness allowed her to release her suffering and embrace the beauty and sadness of life in all its impermanence. This story speaks to the power of mindfulness in transforming our relationship with suffering. By recognizing the impermanent nature of all things, including our grief, we can start to release the hold that attachment has over us. When we stop clinging to the past, to expectations, and to the illusion of control, we free ourselves from the cycle of suffering that arises from attachment. Mindfulness is a profound and transformative practice, but it requires commitment and patience. It is not something that happens overnight. It takes time to cultivate awareness, to observe our patterns, and to slowly let go of the old ways of thinking and reacting. But with consistent practice, mindfulness becomes a way of life, a foundation from which we can build peace, compassion, and wisdom. As we approach the later stages of life, mindfulness provides us with the opportunity to reflect on the choices we've made, to heal old wounds, and to create new patterns of thought and action. It's never too late to begin this practice, to plant new seeds of kindness, forgiveness, and understanding. By embracing the impermanence of life, we break free from the chains of attachment and find peace in the present moment. The power of mindfulness lies in its ability to change the course of our lives. By living with intention, with awareness, we can transform our karma and create a future filled with peace, joy, and wisdom. Each moment offers us the opportunity to act with compassion, to connect with others in meaningful ways, and to contribute to the well-being of the world. Through mindfulness, we not only heal ourselves, but we also become agents of healing in the world. Chapter 9: The Four Immeasurables: Cultivating Positive Karma. The four immeasurables, metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, and upekkha, equanimity, are essential qualities in Buddhism, and practicing them forms the foundation of a peaceful and wise life. These four qualities, deeply rooted in love and understanding, help transform our karma, shifting our hearts and minds in ways that not only benefit us but the world around us. Metta, or loving kindness, is the wish for all beings to be happy and free from suffering. It's about developing a heart that seeks the well-being of others, regardless of their actions or how they may treat us. It's easy to wish good things for those we love, but metta asks us to extend that same goodwill to strangers, those we may not like, or even those who have wronged us. In doing so, we free ourselves from the narrow confines of ego and resentment. It becomes less about what others have done or how they have treated us, and more about embodying a deep, unshakable wish for their happiness. Think about a time when you might have been in conflict with someone, whether it was a small misunderstanding or a larger, more significant issue. Practicing metta doesn't mean simply forgiving or forgetting the wrongs done. Instead, it means genuinely wishing that person happiness, even as you acknowledge the hurt. This shift in perspective lightens your heart and frees you from the burden of anger or grudges. By fostering loving kindness, you create a positive ripple effect in the world, cultivating goodwill not just for yourself, but for everyone. Karuna, or compassion, takes the practice of metta further. It is the desire to alleviate the suffering of others. While metta focuses on wishing happiness, karuna compels us to act. It is about moving beyond passive goodwill and actively seeking to relieve the pain of others. Compassion doesn't only manifest through grand gestures, it's often in the smallest acts of kindness, the listening ear, the helping hand, the moment of patience. Every time we ease another's suffering, we are also purifying our hearts, creating positive karma that will return to us in ways we might not even be able to foresee. For instance, think of someone in your life who may be struggling, perhaps a friend or a family member. Instead of simply feeling sorry for them or wishing they were better off, compassion invites us to step in and offer tangible help. Maybe it's offering support during a tough time, providing a comforting word, or simply spending time with them. Each act, no matter how small, creates positive karma that not only benefits the one being helped, but also nurtures a heart filled with love and understanding. Mudita, or sympathetic joy, is perhaps the most liberating of the four immeasurables. It is the ability to rejoice in the happiness and success of others without envy or comparison. In a world often driven by competition and comparison, cultivating mudita means freeing ourselves from the trap of jealousy. It encourages us to genuinely celebrate the joy of others, knowing that their happiness does not take away from our own. Imagine a colleague who receives recognition at work for their hard work, or a friend who achieves something you've longed for. How easy it is to feel a pang of jealousy or resentment. But through mudita, we can transform that feeling into pure joy for the other person. When we allow ourselves to feel happiness for others, we break the cycle of comparison and feel more connected to those around us. This practice not only creates positive karma, but it also strengthens the bond between us and others, as we move from a mindset of competition to one of mutual support and joy. Lastly, upekkha, or equanimity, is the ability to maintain a balanced and peaceful mind, regardless of the ups and downs of life. It's not about becoming indifferent or detached. Rather, it's about accepting the natural fluctuations of life without being overwhelmed by them. Life will always present challenges, whether it's a personal loss, a disappointment, or an unforeseen change, but with equanimity, we can face these challenges with calm and clarity. For example, consider a difficult situation, a financial setback, a health problem, or a disagreement with a loved one. With equanimity, we don't deny the pain or hardship. Instead, we accept it for what it is, without letting it disturb our inner peace. This allows us to face adversity with wisdom and grace, knowing that everything is temporary and that suffering will pass. By maintaining our balance and not being swept away by emotional extremes, we create a peaceful mind that reflects a deeper understanding of life's impermanence. The four immeasurables are not just theoretical concepts. They are practical tools for transforming our karma and reshaping our lives. Each one helps us break free from the negativity and habitual reactions that often keep us trapped in cycles of suffering. By cultivating loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, we gradually shift from a self-centered existence to one that is guided by wisdom, kindness, and understanding. Through consistent practice of the four immeasurables, we create positive karma, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. Every time we act with these qualities, we are contributing to the collective well-being, creating a ripple effect of peace and joy that extends far beyond our immediate surroundings. In the end, the four immeasurables are not simply about creating good karma, they are about transforming our hearts and minds, replacing negative tendencies with positive ones. This transformation is not only for our benefit. It contributes to the peace and happiness of all beings. By embodying these immeasurables in our daily lives, we become a part of the solution to the world's suffering, moving ever closer to a life of deep peace, wisdom, and love. As we reflect on the teachings of karma, rebirth, and mindfulness, it becomes clear. The path to transformation and liberation is not just a distant ideal, but a very real possibility for each of us. It doesn't matter how far along in life we are, whether we're just beginning to explore these concepts or have been carrying the weight of our past actions for years. It is never too late to start anew. Through mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, we have the power to break free from the cycle of suffering that has held us captive, transforming our lives into something peaceful, purposeful, and filled with fulfillment. Imagine this. Every action, every thought, every word you speak ripples outward, creating a reality far beyond yourself. By embracing the teachings of the Buddha, we learn that our actions truly matter. When we live intentionally, when we choose kindness, compassion, and wisdom over anger and fear, we contribute not just to our own happiness, but to the well-being of everyone around us. The road to liberation isn't about being perfect. It's about understanding that every moment offers an opportunity to act with intention, to make a choice that brings us closer to peace, to break free from the grip of past mistakes, and to shine the light of understanding on the path ahead. Remember the Buddha's words, cease to do evil, cultivate good, purify the mind. These simple yet profound teachings are the foundation for true liberation, and they are accessible to all of us, no matter our age or circumstance. So what's stopping you from taking that first step? But wait, there's more to explore. This video has only scratched the surface of how you can harness the power of these teachings to radically transform your life. I encourage you to reflect on what you've learned, to embrace these practices with an open heart, and to share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Let's build a community rooted in wisdom and compassion together. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who might benefit from this transformative journey. Your feedback, your engagement, and your presence here are what make this journey worthwhile. Stay with us, and let's continue to explore the path to liberation together.